I have to say, it really does feel weird typing this out. There was a time not too long ago I thought I would never be in the same room as a computer again, much less sitting at one that is on. To tell you the truth, the fear and doubt are still in the back of my mind, but I've had some liquid courage and I think it's finally time not just to write down what has happened to me, but share it with the world. I don't know if I feel this way because I just need to get it out of my system. Or maybe I hope that someone will listen to my story and avoid all the terrible crap I've been through these past 8 months. I honestly don't know. All I do know is that I must do this now. So here we go. My name is Liam, and I'm a 28-year-old software engineer living in Essex, Vermont. There isn't much else to tell you about me. Up until last January, my life was quite boring. I'm not an adventurous type. I rarely go traveling. I have a small circle of friends who do the same things together week after week. I'm the kind of person you would never expect some crazy or paranormal to happen to. I guess the only thing that stood out in my personality is that I'm an armchair paranormal investigator. I use the term paranormal investigator very lightly. I'd never go anywhere, never film anything, never try in rituals or spells or anything like that. I didn't even really believe in the paranormal. I watched paranormal videos on YouTube and listened to paranormal investigation podcasts. I'd even do a little bit of more research on a particular place or incident if it was interesting enough for me, but that always just involved a Google search and going through a couple of websites. Even though I was a non-believer, I never actually wanted to take a chance on experiencing anything paranormal firsthand. And I thought that keeping to background research was enough of a barrier that if ghosts and demons and things that go bump in the night did exist, my life would continue to be normal and peaceful. It wasn't. It was a cold January night, and I decided I wanted to focus in on some smaller channels on YouTube. There's a couple of big-name channels that I was a regular viewer of, but sometimes great videos can slip through the cracks because they're from lesser, relatively unknown channels. So, I was typing in various horror video search words in the YouTube search bar, hoping to find something that would pique my interest. I had been scrolling down for about 20 seconds on my Demon House search when I saw a video title that caught my eye. Demon doesn't want to leave an EVP exorcism. The video was only about a minute and a half long, so I decided to click on it and see what it entailed. There was no video, just a picture of a photoshopped demonic-looking face, the kind you see typically in thumbnails. Only audio was playing, and if someone had messed with it, they had done so to make the audio worse, not clearer. However, I could clearly make out words and voices, even with the roughness of the sound. A man was speaking in Latin. I only knew this from certain words I had picked up from my little paranormal research into demons and exorcisms, things like the Latin word for God, demon, holy, cast out, etc. I knew a few seconds into the recording that this man was doing an exorcism. Around the 20-second mark, some words at the end of his sentence seemed garbled. I paused the video, moved back on the timeline, and listened again. The words remained garbled in the same place still. I went back again and again, trying to figure out what the man was saying and why it seemed distorted. It was on my 6th attempt that I realized the issue. Someone was speaking at the same time the man was, and the two voices mixed, causing the audio issue. But this was strange to me, and I felt goosebumps starting to form on my arms. You see, the second voice wasn't deep or demonic, nor was it soft, and barely audible like what you hear from a lot of ghost EVPs. No, this second voice intermingling with the man's voice sounded exactly like the man's voice, as if he had a second mouth that was talking the same time as his first. At the time, I thought that was an amazingly creepy video edit. After all, this video had to fictional, just like the rest of them. That still didn't stop me from praising the editing, and I allowed the video to continue playing. For the next 30 seconds, it was the man voice, speaking in Latin. Then suddenly, a loud growl followed by a chilling moan blared through my speakers, drowning out any of the words the man spoke. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end at this, and I ended up pausing the video again. Wherever or from whomever the video editor got those sounds from, they were absolutely chilling. Both growl and moan seemed to walk a fine line of sounding both human and non-human, earthly and yet unearthly. I couldn't imagine from what sources those sounds came from. I moved back on the timeline and listened again to that roar and moan, almost shivering from the creepiness. The man continued talking, and seemingly finished the exorcism with about 20 seconds left on the video. There was silence for about 5 seconds, then another man spoke, maybe the one holding the recording device? "Do you think it worked?" he asked. There was a brief pause, then the exorcist spoke. "I hope so. You've been recording this, right?" He was suddenly cut off when a third voice spoke up. The voice made me feel, I don't know, disgusted. It wasn't like I felt sick from hearing the voice or anything. It was more like my body, my mind, maybe even my soul, knew I should not be hearing this voice. The voice itself wasn't your typical demonic voice either. It sounded almost monotone. It was just repulsive to my very being. It didn't even say much either. The sentence that cut the exorcist off was simply, "If I can't stay here, can I stay with you, Michael?" I then heard a loud gasp, and the exorcist began speaking in Latin again. The voice wasn't an EVP. Wherever these two were, they'd heard the voice in real time. Then, about 3 seconds before the video ended, laughter began. Oh God, even with only 3 seconds, that laughter will echo in my nightmares until the day I die. It wasn't booming laughter, it wasn't evil little girl giggling, nothing like what you may have heard in horror media. It was low snickering, but there was so much evil packed into each snicker. I can't even find words to describe it. It's one of those feelings that really hit on a personal level, and touches you in a spot in your mind that no amount of logic and reason can explain. You just know something is very wrong, and you want to avoid it at all costs. I was glad that I watched that video. It really set the mood for the rest of the night. I then spent another hour or so browsing other scary videos before turning off my laptop and getting ready for bed. All the other videos I saw that night were certainly longer, but nothing gave me the chills like that first video. But I didn't think much of it, got ready for bed, and went to sleep. No weird nightmares, nothing waking me out of a sound sleep. There was nothing to indicate on that first night of the coming horrors that I was about to endure in the upcoming months. A few days passed, and the video had all but completely left my mind. That was until about a week later. I wanted to do some amateur scary video watching again, and the memory of the laughter popped back into my brain. I couldn't quite remember the name of the video, but I eventually typed enough of the right search words into the search bar to find the video again. Before clicking onto it again, I decided to do a little research on it. The video was over 10 years old, had only about a dozen views on it, and was the only video on the channel. The channel, whose name I will never tell another soul for as long as I live, didn't have any info on it either. It looked like the video was a one and done kind of deal, which is far from uncommon on YouTube. Starting up the video again, I heard the familiar voice of the exorcist speaking Latin again. I'm not very good at speaking other languages other than English, so I always have respect for someone who is bilingual. It got up to the point in the video where we heard the demon or whatever the thing he was exorcising speaking in his own voice over the EVP, and I couldn't help but give a shudder. It seemed odd that someone with this much creativity and editing skill, especially from 10 years ago, would make this one video and then disappear. Maybe it was an assignment for a class they were taking, and they've now made it big in sound design. Their talent for creepiness certainly warranted a future like that. The video continued to the growl and moan, and I couldn't help but get goosebumps again. Usually if I rewatch a scary video, the spooky parts have no effect on me the second time. However, these sound effects were so good, I couldn't help myself. But this time around I felt no need to pause the video and just continued to let it play. However, when it got to the final 10 seconds, I wish I had had the reflexes to pause the video. When it got to the point where the monotone voice interrupted the exorcist, I knew what to expect. A question if it can ask to stay, followed by one of the creepiest laughs I'd ever heard. Instead, what I heard was, "If I can't stay here, how about I stay with you, Liam?" The loud gasp, the exorcist speaking in Latin again, but no laughter. Only silence until the last 2 seconds, that were suddenly filled with another question. "Can I?" Then everything in my apartment turned off. I sat in the darkness for a few seconds in complete and utter shock. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and felt a chill run throughout my entire body. What the hell just happened? Did I just hear what I thought I did? My ears strained to pick up any sound at all, growling, whispering, breathing, words. My teeth began to chatter. I was so afraid at what was going to happen next. But nothing did happen. I was just sitting alone in the dark. After about a minute, I decided to get up from my office chair and do some investigating. My computer setup was in my apartment's living room, so I stood up and tried to do my best not to stumble into anything. Absolutely nothing was on, and my blinds were drawn, so it was completely black for me. Luckily, I managed to make my way to the window based on muscle memory and didn't stub my toe on anything. Peeking through the blinds, the only lights that were anywhere in my apartment complex were emergency lights. Looks like the windy winter of January caused a power outage, nothing too unusual. I sighed and felt my way over to my couch to take a seat and calm my fast-beating heart. I sat in the dark for a little while, hand on my chest, trying to slow my breathing and calm my clicking teeth. Okay, that was freaky, I'll admit. But I had to be hearing things. There's no way the audio changed like that, right? I was just hearing things. Been watching too many scary videos. I said this out loud because I wanted to fill the void of silence in my apartment. If only the power hadn't gone out, then I could rewatch the video and prove to myself that I was only hearing things. But the power didn't come back for the rest of the night, and I had to fumble about in the dark to get to my bedroom, take my clothes off and get into bed. I needed the extra sleep anyways. Everything seemed perfectly normal after that. No nightmares. My alarm on my phone went off as it always did, nothing rearranged or missing in my apartment. I decided then and there that it had been an audio hallucination due to my night owl habits. After all, everything was fine in the morning, and things continued to be fine for me, for about 5 days. My first clue that things weren't as they should be was just after I had gotten home from work on Friday evening. I was going to have a few friends over for some late-night board games and drinking. So, after getting home and dressing more casually, I went into my kitchen to get the drinks and snacks prepped. First, I got out the bottle of vodka and 4 glasses, placed them on the counter, then turned back to my fridge. I grabbed the 12-pack of beer, put it on the counter, opened it, and placed the beers 2 at a time back into my fridge. After I placed the last 2 bottles, I grabbed the meat and cheese tray I had picked up the previous night, took it out of the fridge, turned to put it on the counter, and froze. The bottle of vodka was balanced precariously on its cap upside down. I stared at the bottle intensely. I couldn't help let loose. "What the fuck?" out loud. At the time, I was more confused than scared. I didn't think the bottle could balance like that, and I certainly didn't have the dexterity to do it. But if I didn't do it, how did it end up like that? I set the tray off to the side and turned the bottle back right side up. What had just happened was weird, but before I could think more about it, my doorbell rang, and the arrival of my friends pushed the incident to the back of my mind. Looking back on that day, I don't think at the time with the bottle was the only disturbance. We just got a little too intoxicated to notice the other moments. In the 3 board games that we all ended up playing that night, there was an unusually high amount of cheating by everyone. It seems like nobody's pieces stayed in their designated spots for long. It happened so much actually that nobody seemed to mind, and we laughed it off rather than get upset. Still, I wonder how much was actual cheating, and the other percentage was player 5 trying to get a rise out of us. I know for a fact I never cheated once, but was accused at least twice of doing so. After that night, and for the next couple of weeks, nothing spooky or creepy happened, but there was a change in my apartment. I never imagined I would spend my entire life in the place, but I still considered it home. Yet, in those few weeks, the atmosphere of the place changed. I started to feel like a stranger in my home, sometimes even feelings like I didn't belong there. The movement of shadows began to make me jump, and the only times I felt happiness in my place was when friends were over and we were having fun. The rest of the time I felt morose at best, and struggled to go about my day. It was weird because the moment I stepped out of my apartment, all the melancholy I felt seemed to slip from my shoulders and heart, and the second I crossed the threshold back into my place, that came back. It was like taking off and putting on a sadness coat. Finally, in March, I decided to do something about it. One of my workers, a woman named Melissa, was kind of into the herbs and crystals and hippie stuff. I decided to tell her about the depression that seemed to be hanging over my house, and almost like she was prepared for it, she reached into her bag and withdrew what looked like a bundle of dried grass. She told me it was white sage, and that it was a smudging stick. She told me briefly how to use it, and then she wrote something down quickly on a notepad and handed it to me. She said it was a small prayer to recite in each room as I smudged it. Honestly, I didn't believe it would work. But she was being very nice and generous to me, and who knew, maybe it would work. I thanked her for her generosity and decided I would try it out as soon as I got home. She asked me to let her know how it went, and I promised I would let her know. The hours flew by, and soon enough I found myself outside my apartment door, keys in one hand and smudge stick in another. When I entered my place, the energy felt different somehow. It still felt different to how my apartment felt all that before this whole ordeal began, but it wasn't an oppressive, depressing feel anymore. It felt tense in my place now, like something was about to happen, and my nerves began flare with anticipation and energy. I imagine it was how cowboys felt when they met in the street for a duel, and were waiting for the go, watching each other's hands, anticipating the time to pull their pistol and shoot. I didn't like feeling like this, so I decided to just get this over with. I went into my kitchen and got out my utility lighter. I lit and blew on the end of the smudge stick as instructed until a thin but constant stream of smoke was coming from it. I set the lighter down and grabbed the sticky note from my pocket and began to read aloud. "Let light and life enter." But before I could go on, suddenly the entire smudge stick was on fire, and I mean 6-inch flames flaring up from everywhere on it. Of course, I dropped it immediately, and as my smoke detector started its high-pitched wail at me, and thank God my kitchen was tiled, I immediately snapped into action and grabbed the sprayer from my kitchen sink, turning it on full blast and putting out the blazing smudge stick in a matter of seconds. I stood there, shaking a bit as the adrenaline coursed through my body, and I thought everything was okay. But then the smoke from the doused smudge stick reached my nose and I began to gag violently. Normally I don't like the smell of eggs, but this smoke smelled as if I stuck my face into a dozen rotten eggs and inhaled deeply. I cursed as I ran to all the windows in my house to open them. I was going to be pissed with Melissa if this smell lingered. She told me white sage was supposed to smell good. Maybe there was something buried inside the smudge stick that gave off a smell like rotting eggs when burned quickly. As I briskly made it to my front windows, I stopped before opening them as a thought popped into my head. You know what also smells like rotten eggs? Sulfur. The incident from January suddenly came flashing back into my brain, and I felt the hair on my arms slowly rise. There was no way, absolutely no way. My heart began to pound hard in my chest. It was a stupid video on YouTube. I pulled up the blinds on my windows and began to open them when I stopped dead in my tracks. It was still early enough in the year so that the sun was down by now, and with the darkness outside, I could see reflections back into my own apartment very clearly. As I began to open one of the windows, I saw something in the reflection that froze my muscles in mid-motion. In my kitchen, I could clearly see a tall, black mass. I knew the smoke from the smoldering mess of the smudge stick was gray, so there was no way this could be a collection of it. It was pitch black, I mean as black as the night outside. It had no discernible features, but it had a general humanoid shape. The moment I caught sight of it in the reflection, the energy shifted again in my apartment, and it wasn't a good shift. This is the best way I can describe it. Everyone knows how it feels to be angry. Now imagine you aren't angry, but you can feel that anger on your skin, with every breath you take, and drilling into your mind. You can look at an angry person and tell that they're mad from observations, but you never truly feel their anger. With this thing, that had no features on it, I could feel that it was super pissed. And it was super pissed at me. The adrenaline kicked it, and I spun around super fast, trying to catch sight of this thing with my own eyes. Nothing was there in the kitchen, and yet the anger was still surrounding me. I decided to open the window and then step outside. I needed to get out of my apartment immediately. Like every time before, the split second I left, everything felt normal again. Yet I felt I had to be on vigil. I spent half an hour looking into my apartment from my front windows, constantly scanning to see anything, straining my ear to pick out the faintest of sounds, sniffing every minute to detect any weird smells. I knew I would probably look out of my mind to anyone passing by, but luckily no one did. Even though I was a non-believer up to that point, I'm not some stupid horror movie stereotype. I know what I saw, and there is no other way to explain it other than something paranormal was now inhabiting my house. I didn't want it to be true, but there was no other explanation. Okay, maybe there were, but I couldn't think of any at the time. Maybe not all those paranormal videos I had watched were fake after all. With that thought, an idea came to mind. I pulled out my phone and began to search YouTube for the video I had watched those months ago. Maybe I could find an email to contact the poster, ask if they have any info on the demon voice in the video. Yet, with a growing panic, no matter what I searched, no matter how much I scrolled, I could not find the video. I couldn't even remember what the poster's name was, so that plan was out the window. My scrolling stopped, however, as I heard a low but very audible breath from right in front of me. I didn't want to look up from my phone, but I knew I needed to. I needed to face whatever this thing was doing. I didn't have anywhere else to run to. Shivering slightly, I raised my face from staring down at the phone to notice nothing at all. I looked through the window one last time to see if there was something in my apartment, but the place was still and quiet. Cautiously, I stepped back inside, and the sadness of the place fell upon me again. Although I didn't like feeling the depression, I'd take it over the anger. Whatever was here wasn't irritated with me anymore, or at least not like it had been with the smudging stick. When I went into the kitchen to retrieve the charred and drenched thing, I found it all over the kitchen floor, like someone in a rage had stomped on the thing for quite a while. I was still finding bits of it for months afterwards. The next day, I approached Melissa on our lunch break and told her everything that had happened. She was wide-eyed for most of the story, and at the end when I asked her what I should do, she told me that something like that was way above anything she'd ever heard of in person. Unfortunately, she didn't really know any spirit mediums or exorcists or anything like that, and she suggested trying to look online for someone who could help. I ended up trying that a few days later. Not too many paranormal teams in the state of Vermont, so I made a list of the closest ones with the hope of contacting them soon. That plan went out the window when I came home the next day and found my $1,300 computer setup completely smashed and destroyed. I guess it had been watching me do the searches. I still could have contacted some of these paranormal researchers, but judging by the angry reaction for just looking them up, I didn't want to deal with the fury if they actually came to my place. They'd get to leave if things got hairy. I didn't have that luxury. Then I tried buying a bunch of holy symbols from all different religions and cultures, and plastered every free space I could with them. That ended up with me going to the hospital after a wooden crucifix with a silver Jesus on it flew off the wall and smacked me across the face, giving me quite the cut across my jawline. Luckily for me, it only required a few stitches. When I got back from the hospital, the rest of the holy symbols were littering the floor, all destroyed or broken in various ways. In the middle of June, I tried something I didn't think was possible, ignoring the presence. Let me tell you, it was one of the hardest things I've ever attempted, and whatever was in my apartment did not like it at all. For the first 2 weeks, there was activity every couple of hours. Things would move on their own. Footsteps would be heard running around where there was nothing. Things would fly out of cabinets. At night, I would hear scratches on my bedroom door, whispers, moans, and sometimes growls. But with each activity, I would denounce it out loud as something natural. A cup falls out of the cabinet? Boy, I really need to look at that cabinet, see if it's level. A chair moves from one spot to another? Man, I gotta remember moving the furniture better. At least I like it in the new place better. After that, things got more intense for a few days. Whatever this thing was, it upped its game to horror movie status. Things floated, my bed would shake violently. I was even shoved against the wall once or twice. But each time I made some excuse, no matter how stupid it sounded, to act like it wasn't the demon doing it. I never thought you could fight something with apathy, but it seemed to anger this thing immensely. Then suddenly, everything seemed to go back to normal. The heavy atmosphere dispersed, things stopped moving on their own, nights were quiet and restful again. For the first few days of calm, I kept my guard up. But as days turned to weeks, I finally felt relief creep back into me. Somehow, I had beaten this thing, or maybe it would be more accurate to say I bored it so much that it moved on to find another victim, someone who would react to it. I felt bad that it wasn't banished back to hell or wherever it came from, but finally not having to deal with it beat out any pangs of guilt I might have felt. But all that came crashing down 2 weeks ago. It was a Sunday night, and I had already gotten into my pajamas. I exited my bedroom and began to walk down the hallway to my kitchen for a glass of water, when all of a sudden, the all-encompassing anger I had felt in the air months ago came back so quickly and strongly that I stopped in my tracks and clutched my chest. It felt like something was reaching into my chest and squeezing the literal breath from my lungs. I gasped and struggled just to stay on my feet. Legs shaking, I looked back down the hallway and the blood turned to ice in my veins. The black mass I saw all those months ago was at the end of my hallway. It was so dark that it stood out from the blackness that surrounded it. I was barely able to process what I was seeing when suddenly, it teleported in front of me. Maybe it moved, I don't know, but if it did move, it was so fast that I couldn't even tell it moved. It was in one spot one moment, and in front of me in the next. My mouth fell agape as I stared up at the horrific thing, and I saw in the darkness that would have been its head 2 pinpricks of red staring back at me. Then it smiled. I couldn't see it smile, there was no mouth for it to smile with, but I knew it was smiling at me. "I like it here." It spoke, and its voice felt like someone stuck a red-hot knife into my ears and scrambled it around. If I was frozen in terror, I would have brought my hands up to my ears and screamed, or maybe smacked my head against the wall, anything to get the voice out of my head. It continued, "I've decided to make this place my home and I'm going to stay here for a long time." It then leaned down until its face was mere inches from mine, its raw unholy energy feeling like thousands of slugs crawling across my entire face. "And there is nothing you can do about it." It was gone as quickly as it appeared, and I could breathe again, the anger around me disappearing with the demon. I collapsed to the ground and began to weep. I thought I had beaten this thing. I thought I was finally free from all this. Yet here it was, seemingly as strong as it ever was. By God, it almost touched me. I couldn't do this anymore, but I had no idea how to escape from this thing. I was at the end of my rope, and my mind was desperately racing, trying to think of anything it could do to get me out of this situation. But then a thought hit me, and I stopped panicking almost immediately. The answer was literally just delivered to me from the mouth of my enemy. There was no way it would work, but then again, why wouldn't it? My hopes had just been dashed. Was it possible that like a phoenix they could rise from the ashes with this one simple move? I had to try it. The next day, I took advantage of being a simple man with only a few hobbies that has been constantly working for the past 10 years and been doing nothing much with my life except work, play board and video games with friends, eat, sleep, and save money. The day after that ghastly encounter with the demon in my hallway, I called in sick and found a new apartment. It wasn't as nice, the commute to work was a little more of a pain in the ass, and it still cost the same as my old place. But after being here for 2 weeks, I can confidently say that it is demon-free, and that is priceless. I never took a single step back into my old apartment. I hired movers to come and pack up all my stuff. The lead guy joked with me that I and my roommate must have had one hell of a falling out, as most of my things were either broken or scattered about the apartment. I just laughed it off, telling the guy, "You have no idea. Material things can be repaired or replaced. I'm just grateful I decided not to go back to that literal hellhole to grab clothing or anything like that." So yeah, that's my story. It does feel weird basking in the glow of a computer screen again. Although I'm sharing my experience, I think it's going to be a while before I muster up the courage to watch videos again. And I know I've given up watching horror things altogether. Once you've lived through something like I have, you don't even want anything that can trigger those memories. I don't quite have that luxury though. You see, even though I never posted any videos, I still have a YouTube account. In the past 3 days, they've been flooded with subscribers. They all have different names, and no info on who they are on their page. They all only have one video they posted. Demon doesn't want you to leave EVP. I've never clicked on any of the videos though. I learned my lesson months ago. Invitations come in many forms, and you never know what's lurking, listening, hanging on to your every word for its chance to enter into your life.